The thing that's hard to do is import and export marijuana, the intoxicating stuff, right? Whether it's quote unquote medical marijuana, which is a term that we use a lot in this country and that states use, but the federal government doesn't use, or whether it's non-medical marijuana.
Before we get started with the show, here's a quick word from our sponsor, Global Training Center. As trade compliance professionals, you want to make sure that your procedures and documentation are completed as correctly as possible to avoid any delays and possible fines. We provide a range of trade compliance courses that will fit your needs. From in-person or web training to recorded on-demand courses, we can train one or even thousands on your team through your learning platform or on our portal. We can even customize a private session for your team. Go to globaltrainingcenter.com to find out more.
Folks, we're on for another podcast show with Simply Trade, and our Simply Trade podcast, folks, we greatly appreciate your listenership. We have a great show today that is going to be it's a cool one. It's a little different. How to import, I guess, or transact business when you're dealing with marijuana. And that's one of those, that's a business is a tough scenario here. Others would call it marijuana or whatever you want to call it. No, seriously though, it's, there are a lot of CBD, type products. There's a lot of different, it has THC, doesn't have THC. What's the government involved in it? What about the banking? What about all the different challenges and all that? So I'm looking forward to, looking at this, Lalo. And,
I wanted to say is I don't know what you're talking about. There's a lot of people and organizations here on the border that actually don't have trouble importing marijuana. Might not be legally, but they don't have any trouble doing it. So, but anyway, and I guess I just need to tell Vince and so our guests. I need to let our Vince and Adams know that our guests. I'm on the border. I'm in the El Paso, Texas, so. So we hear a lot about that. But anyway, sorry guys. I let me bring them in. So Vince and Adams both are part of the law firm Harris Bricken that we've had on previous occasions. We've had them on our show. One of those episodes was our forced labor show, and the other one was on Hong Kong and Asia and stuff like that. So today we have from the same law firm, we have Vince Sliwoski, and I hope I got that right, and then Adams Lee. So both of you, thank you so much for coming on. When you guys pitched this idea and this concept of a show, we're like all over it. We're like, yeah, I can just think of a bunch of different of marketing the show, like get high on trade or whatever. But anyway, we'll figure it out. So anyway, but welcome guys, and thank you for joining our show here.
Sure. Yeah, no, happy to be here. Just for a note for you and your audience, our firm name has recently changed. Bricken is no more, so it's Harris Sliwoski, and we are a mid-sized law firm with a couple of really prominent practice areas, which are just perfect for today's show because we do a lot of work in controlled substances and we do a lot of work in international trade. And I'm more on the controlled substances side. Adams is more on the international trade side. So yeah, thanks for having us, and we look forward to talking with you.
Excellent. Okay. So getting into this, I don't know. Vince, let me just throw to you first here is where would you like to start with this? I mean, there's all kinds of ideas and things are coming. It's like, hey, wow, this is some good stuff, man, kind of stuff, and be kind of crazy with it. But in all seriousness, where should we start in this discussion?
Maybe it would help if I gave sort of just a really high level overview of kind of like the status of legality of marijuana shipments and marijuana as distinct from hemp. And then maybe that would sort of inform some interesting discussion or questions. Would that work?
Yes. Oh, that would be perfect. Yes.
Okay. So good. I'm sure you guys and most listeners know or intuitively understand that marijuana is not legal under U.S. federal law, right? We have something called the Controlled Substances Act, and marijuana is still on Schedule 1, which means it's considered by Congress and everybody else to be the most dangerous possible substance with no possible medical use and such. So it's very heavily controlled, despite the fact that all sorts of states are rolling out these adult use programs and regulating it for retail sale and everything else. There's also another part of the cannabis plant. It's the same plant, but legally it has the definition of hemp when it has at or below 0.3% of THC in it on a dry weight basis. And THC is a cannabinoid in the cannabis plant. And it's a cannabinoid that gets people high, right? That has got an intoxicating effect. So although the cannabis plant is one plant, it's got two sort of like considerations or treatments under U.S. federal law. One is the marijuana thing I talked about, and one is this hemp designation or classification, which only came into play as recently as 2018 under the Farm Bill, when Congress finally said, okay, we're going to recognize that the marijuana plant could be treated a little bit differently for other non-intoxicating uses, whatever they are. It could be building materials, fiber, grain, animal feed, everything that people use hemp for or want to use hemp for. Okay, so when you talk about exporting, cannabis, you can export hemp generally and import hemp generally because there are no U.S. federal law restrictions on that per se. I mean, there are all sorts of things you have to comply with, like phytosanitary certificates from, I don't remember who it even is, Department of Agriculture probably, and Adams could talk more about that. The thing that's hard to do is import and export marijuana, the intoxicating stuff, right? Whether it's quote unquote medical marijuana, which is a term that we use a lot in this country and that states use, but the federal government doesn't use, or whether it's non-medical marijuana, just adult use, like have, recreational stuff, for lack of a better word. That's hard. What people have done is start to make some inroads in importing and exporting seeds of the plant that is a marijuana plant. In other words, these are just non-germinated seeds that you buy like at a gardening store, say, although you don't buy marijuana seeds in a gardening store, but it's the same kind of concept. And these seeds will cultivate or germinate into high THC plants, right? And the federal government has been equivocal about that in a sense, because when they pulled hemp out of the Controlled Substances Act, the way they defined it arguably excluded cannabis seeds from this controlled substances definition. And there's a letter from the Drug Enforcement Administration kind of opining on that sort of softly, where they said, yeah, those seeds are probably hemp, even though they'll grow up into very like powerful intoxicating plants, they're hemp. So people have used that letter and some interpretations of the general like rubric of federal law to begin to do commerce in these marijuana seeds, which are hemp, right? So that's kind of the really broad barrel state of the law. We could get into international law requirements, public international law, all that sort of stuff. But I think I just want to leave it there and see how you guys want to take the conversation or what Adams may want to add.
Well, and Adams, I want to get to you in just a second, but let me just say, based on what you've already said, I mean, there are a lot of applications for hemp. There's fiber that comes from the cannabis plant, hence the hemp. And one of the products that is probably been used with hemp for generations, and that's a lasso. What the cowboys used, and working cattle and whatnot. The rope that most people would look at and consider whatever is actually some of the best lassos are made out of hemp. And whatnot. But I mean, there's others, there's other products like you just said. That said, it's interesting that from an agriculture perspective, if you are a farmer that is wanting to basically produce a product, a crop that would generate for hemp products, you got to have the seeds. It comes from the same plant. The question would be, if that is in fact the case, I'm using, let's say, the stalks and the things that would be used for generating hemp. Then you've got the rest of the plant. Is it legal for those items then to be, I'll just call it processed, however appropriate for marijuana, and be sold to, like the you go down the road nowadays in some of these locations, and you've got CBD stores and stuff like that. Is that possible? Is that legal, or is that still an issue there if you are using the seeds or the crop from the seeds, not just for hemp, but for other things?
Yeah, it's a great question. So when Congress legalized hemp in 2018 under the Farm Bill, they did it in what I consider to be a very clumsy way. And I think a lot of people would agree with me. And it created truck-sized intoxicating loopholes in commerce. And people are clever, right? They've taken the hemp plant, the low THC plant, and they've been able to engineer it and isolate certain cannabinoids that you see for sale. And they're of, dubious legality in a lot of cases, or probably illegal, but arguably legal. And it's confusing. And there's these Delta 9 THC things, and people are, isolating CBD. That's the most prominent cannabinoid that's isolated from the hemp plant. I think when Congress legalized hemp in 2018, what they wanted to do was create that market you just talked about with Lasso's, like a fiber and grain market and the textiles market and all that. And what they instead seemed to get was a bunch of people that were interested in growing hemp for selling these like vape type products at gas stations, right? Like intoxicating products. People figured out how to take the hemp plant and use it to get people really, really high, despite the fact that the plant may have less than that 0.3% THC in it on a dry weight basis. That's the problem. And Congress is revisiting the Farm Bill, or should be. Congress is pretty dysfunctional right now, but they're supposed to be revisiting it this fall, right? Because it's renewed every 5 years. The Farm Bill is the primary sort of like food security legislation of the U.S. It doesn't just deal with hemp. It deals with like all of our food supply and food chain issues. But this is a prominent issue on Congress's radar, because a lot of people are saying, what's going on? Like, what's even legal right now? Why is all this intoxicating stuff for sale all over the country at gas stations? Minors can buy it in some cases. Things like we're talking about today. Can you import this stuff? Can you export this stuff? What does customs think about it? What does anybody think about it? And most of the federal agencies haven't even opined on it. A few have, like that DEA letter I mentioned earlier in the episode. So it's a morass right now. It really is a mess, as messy as anything could almost be. And hopefully we get some pretty significant and thoughtful changes to the state of the law as soon as this fall or early next year.
Adams, if you have I assume you have to have a permit for importing, let's say, these seeds or the hemp product. We're going to stay with that for the moment. If once I import something in, let's say I import these seeds in, and I've got an agriculture. Well, first off, do you have to have a permit, or do you just import it in and ag just approves it? I guess my ignorance, I'm telling you, I'm dumb as a box of rocks here, guys. So you're going to have to draw me a picture. Okay.
Yeah, no, that's a good place to start, because I guess, when you import any product, right, what are the government regulations that apply to an importer? It's in the good old days, customs would basically be at the border. You cross the border, you declare what you're importing. If you're importing goods, they'll check it off and see if it's okay, if it's legal, if it meets all the requirements. But as the country grew and commerce grew, customs couldn't check every single transaction that crossed the border. So the legal status for importers now is that, it places the legal burden on importers to truthfully declare the entry of the merchandise. And it places the legal burden to say, what's the country of origin? What is this product? Where, what's the value? And if you don't declare the entry truthfully, customs can go after you. But it's not like they're there at the border checking your every single entry, as it crosses the border. So the standard for importers is, are you exercising reasonable care in how you're declaring the goods? And so if you're saying, I'm importing this hemp plant and, I think it's legal and it's coming from Colombia, then that's on you. That's how you declare it. And customs has a way to check it, but, they may not check it immediately. They may get back to you the next week, the next month or so. And then they'll say, hey, was that really hemp from Colombia, or was it something else that was illegal? So, you don't need an import permit to come in, but you're always at risk of customs checking and calling you out to say, hey, did you actually declare your entry truthfully and legally as a product that can be allowed into the U.S.?
Okay, so once it's cleared though into the commerce, it becomes a domestic transaction, right? So it's cleared in the commerce, not a domestic transaction. Excuse me. Once you clear it into the commerce under hemp or whatever, then it's one of those things again that however you use it, it's been cleared, so you can use it however you want. Although I would say that there's probably an issue that I'm clearing it as hemp, and now I'm going to go and use it and make, let's say, the vaping cartridges or something out of it or something like that. If I'm declaring it for fiber for textiles, but then I use it for something else, that would be an issue at some point when an audit may be conducted at some point. Would that be a fair statement, or is that, you know what, I imported it as hemp for textile, and what, go from there?
So basically, it's whoever is the importer of record that's declaring the entry to customs. They are the ones who are saying, I'm taking responsibility for this product that's being declared to customs. And if customs comes back later with an issue, that entity who's the importer of record, they're on the hook. So if customs say, hey, no, we disagree, that actually we think that was a controlled substance, that importer of record becomes the one who has to deal with customs going after them, even if the goods have long been cleared and sold to the customers and all that after customs may have initially let it through.
All right. So when it comes to these types of products, folks, don't import it under one. The message I'm hearing is don't import it under one context that I'm going to importing it for one use, but then after you clear it, you say, oh, I can do whatever. And then you change that without understanding you potentially can get yourself into some trouble, because if it is imported as, let's now flip this around. Instead of hemp, now I want to import some CBD type products or cannabis or whatever that would be considered a controlled substance. So how do I go about that? And let's say it's medical marijuana. I'm just going to use that since that would be, I would think, a legal way to import marijuana.
I should probably just correct that. There's no probably legal way to import medical marijuana unless you're doing it in conjunction with FDA and DEA permit for research purposes, which is really, really hard to do. I think that's been done like once or twice in history, not very recently. So typically it's just, that's not a thing that's done or can be done. But with respect to the rest of the question, Adams could answer that.
Yeah, no, and that's kind of the issue. Is like you have products that are kind of in that gray area. If it's hemp, that seems pretty clear, and customs seems to have signed off and saying yes, hemp is okay. They've issued classification rulings saying this is the right code that you should use for hemp, CBD, CBD oils. Those are okay products. But if you've got other products that are not clear, say it's like a dried hemp flower that is coming in a rolled joint form, right? It's like, that sure looks like a marijuana joint. It's like, and so that could be a controlled substance or it could not be. And so the usual path to get customs to sign off on this is to ask for a customs classification ruling. Does customs agree that this is not a controlled substance? And if it is not a controlled substance, what's the classification code that an importer should use to declare this product? And so I think, there have been people who've tried to ask for these customs classification rulings, but customs has basically sat on it and haven't made a decision, probably in part because they're waiting to see if Congress is going to do some further action to kind of further clarify what is legal or not legal, and sort of give the agencies guidance as to how they should deal with this. Because right now, the cannabis business is way out in front of ahead of where the legislation is. You've got legislation that's kind of laid this 0.3% THC benchmark out there, and they ran with it so far ahead that the legal stuff that it has light years to catch up right now.
Yeah, and I guess that's part of the problem, that when people think that like when they're I've read and I've seen in a bunch of not a bunch, but I've seen like in articles or in news stories where you're flying in back to the United States and you have medical marijuana on your person, and because you're from California, let's say, or Colorado or somewhere where it's okay, and you're flying in and you think, oh, it's okay because I'm clearing customs and, personally in California or Colorado, and they allow it. What they don't realize is that it's CBP, that's a federal agency, that is actually going to be clearing you and not the state, right? I mean, and so that's just like the mistake that people make sometimes in thinking that, oh my goodness, it's not going to be a problem. I have a medical card for it and everything, right? I mean, I guess that's pretty common, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, U.S. CBP has restrictions, that say you're coming in from Canada, where all types of marijuana are legal there. And if you come across the border, CBP is going to say, hey, great, we understand Canada is legal, but, here federally, you can't bring in marijuana across the border. And in fact, Canada, where it is legal there, you can't bring marijuana into Canada. Canadian customs is going to stop, anyone coming in, even if you're coming in from Washington, California, any state that's legal, and you say, hey, I bought this marijuana legally in the States. Canada's going to say, sorry, we don't allow marijuana to cross into our borders, even though you can buy it legally in Canada, wherever.
So the key thing is the intoxicating part of the cannabis. Don't try and cross the border with it. I mean, there are the exceptions, which would be, as you mentioned before, the research purposes and with permits and all that. Okay, fine. But basically for, medical purposes, for pleasure or recreation, whatever, it's like, don't try and cross the international borders, what I'm pretty much hearing. With that, the cannabis business, I mean, Adams, you just mentioned it. It is, I mean, it's exploded out there. I mean, obviously, California and Colorado and different places around I was even in my own stomping grounds in the Oklahoma area and even Texas. I see these cannabis shops opening up and I'm going, what the heck? So are you guys telling me that the majority of their products, if not all, well, I guess it'd have to be all their products, are domestic in origin?
Yeah. I mean, and not only can you not ship them internationally, but you can't even ship them from state to state at this point legally, right? So, I mean, a marijuana grower in California can't send their cannabis up to Oregon, where I am. Just, they can't drive it right across because each state has very restrictive, what we call seed to sale programs, where a plant is tracked from the point it's a seed all the way through the point where it's sold to a retail consumer within a closed loop state system, right? So, I mean, yeah, you can't even send it there, let alone over the border, overseas.
Unbelievable. So I guess as we're talking through this, are there accessories to the can? Like or I don't know, these vaping cartridges or the vapes or the the things you smoke with and the accessories are a lot of that is not manufactured here in the U.S. So I imagine that's imported. I assume that's done legally.
It depends. Adam's dealt a lot with this. The Controlled Substances Act defines that stuff as drug paraphernalia, or said a better way, the CSA defines drug paraphernalia as any equipment or product or material of any kind which is primarily used or intended or designed for producing a controlled substance, right? So it sort of gets into this intent analysis. Would that be fair to say? And the CSA does prohibit the sale or trafficking in drug paraphernalia, just like it prohibits the trafficking in the underlying controlled substance. And I'll let sort of Adams take it from there, because he has dealt with seizures on import and export of, accessory type devices.
Water pipes, bongs, rolling papers, things like that. Customs has seized those products and declared those are drug paraphernalia. And a lot of times Customs is going to look at the company that's importing the product. They'll check their websites and say, hey, how are you marketing this product? Is this as a dual use product? Yes, it could be used for non-controlled substance purposes, but how are you marketing? And if you're marketing as a way to get high, their Customs is going to use that against you and say, hey, you're marketing this as a product to help you, consume, ingest, sort of distribute controlled substances. So they've used that to say, hey, look, that's why we're deeming this product to be drug paraphernalia, and that's why we're seizing, detaining it, and say goodbye to your import shipment that you tried to bring in.
That's right. I want to back up and just clarify one thing that we sort of glossed over on this whole import-export of medical cannabis discussion. The thing I didn't mention there is a path on the pharmaceutical side, right? And we've been talking about non-pharmaceutical stuff today, but there is one FDA-approved cannabis drug. It's a seizure drug. It's called Epidiolex, and what it really is CBD distillate, in my understanding. And if something is approved by the FDA, then it's pulled out of the Controlled Substances Act. It's often placed on a different schedule than Schedule 1, or just descheduled entirely. Now Epidiolex is descheduled entirely, and you can import and export that cannabis product, Epidiolex, right? Because FDA approved it. Everything else, no. Even if you think it has medical use, or it's called medical marijuana in the program where it was derived from federally, the federal government doesn't recognize it. So I just wanted to call that out because it is an exception of sorts, or a parallel path of sorts.
What about businesses that are doing business with, let's say, the cannabis stores and things of that nature? Are there repercussions or restrictions, things of that nature? It sounds like not only as far as transportation, it's got to be, within the state itself, but what about transporting those products? If I am a truck driver, if I am a express courier, if I am obviously you cannot send any of that kind of stuff by the U.S. Postal, because it's federally, it's against the law to do that. And I assume it's with the post office, you can't do it. So if I'm how can I do business with a cannabis company? If I'm a bank, if I'm a office supply store, if I'm a transportation company, are there restrictions there?
So this is a great question, and it gets complicated and convoluted. I remember a couple of years ago, I wrote a piece on marijuana banking, and it was titled "All Businesses Are Cannabis Businesses," because, as you mentioned, the cannabis economy is so big that everybody can't help but touch it in some way. Do you own a 401k or a mutual fund? Well, there's a company called Innovative Industrial Properties that's traded on the New York Stock Exchange, and its sole purpose is to buy and lease land to marijuana businesses, right? So you're invested in that, whether you like it or not. Do you own a slice of Scott's Miracle Grow, another New York Stock Exchange company? Well, they have a subsidiary that invests directly into the cannabis industry and sells it all sorts of fertilizers and things. So everybody's sort of tied into this industry. Banks are tied into it. If you look at the last quarter, the Treasury Department tracks how many what are called SARs are filed, that stands for suspicious activity reports, and banks are required to file one if they're dealing with somebody that they know to be trafficking in a controlled substance. There were 800 banks and credit unions that filed a SAR last quarter. So they're either trying to bank these businesses, or they just noticed a transaction with the business. everybody's tied into this at this point, and it just creates this kind of half in, half out scenario that we've found ourselves in as a country, where on the one hand we're saying you can't do this, you can't trade, you can't export, you can't whatever the stuff we're talking about today, and on the other hand everybody's kind of a part of it, whether they like it or don't like it, because it's so big and so pervasive.
Not only do I want to hear your point now on follow up to this, but let me add something. If I am doing business from a domestic perspective, obviously, I'm trying to support. There's opportunity for to sell my services or goods to a cannabis store. Great. Should I be doing a restricted party, denied party screening type of activity with a party there, even though it's a domestic?
Yeah, my point was just talking about the supply chain. You talked about the U.S. Postal Service is like, yeah, you can't mail marijuana, right? But that also extends to like Federal Express or UPS or DHL. They all have standard language in their, forms that you sign off on when you ship. It's like, you're not allowed to ship marijuana or any controlled substance there. And occasionally what we've seen is, FedEx or UPS, they will stop a package from going through if they, see a flag that they think that the product that's being shipped is a marijuana plant. So it's not just UPS. These commercial delivery services are also very well aware of the federal laws that say it's illegal to ship controlled substances. So that part of the supply chain. Whether DHL, FedEx are going to be the cops, the police in terms of stopping all the transactions, no, but, they understand the rules and they don't want to get themselves in legal jeopardy by knowingly shipping a product that's a controlled substance. So, you have to kind of work with them and kind of explain to them, hey, my product's not a controlled substance, and here's why you should have let this through, or here's why you should let it through. And, and then to your other point, right, as to should you be concerned? Should you do a due diligence, check on all your, business partners on whether they're, okay or not? The hard part is that it's very difficult to do so. The supply chain is so broad and deep and everyone's involved. So where are you going to draw the line as to whether that party is, legally okay or not? Maybe Vince can expand on that a little bit more, on the challenges on doing that type of due diligence.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost a case by case basis, and it's like, what kind of business are you dealing with? What does that business do? What are you trying to do with them? I don't know. I mean, if you gave me a specific example, I might sort of be able to talk about it. I think that people generally perceive those types of transactions as relatively low risk these days, especially if they're dealing with like a state compliant operator, because we haven't seen any federal enforcement against state compliant operators, even for growing and trafficking in marijuana. So if you're a business providing, say, some sort of courier or utility, or like you're a landlord leasing property to them or whatever, I think the perceived risk is pretty low at this point for those individuals and businesses, but it's still real. It's still out there. I mean, if you read the Controlled Substance Act, it has aiding and abetting liability and accessory liability and all those sorts of things. So it's just this kind of thing where we have a big sort of unwieldy, bulky area of law that's just not being enforced and not being adhered to. And it's to the point where people don't even understand that it could possibly be illegal to do some of these things, like lease a property to a cannabis operator, say.
Well, with that, I will say that, and as we need to probably, wrap this up, but it sounds like there is a tremendous amount of work that's going to be needed to be done legislatively. And then, from the legislation comes regulation, which is the bureaucratic agencies, whether at the federal level as well as the state level. But let me ask this question as we go through, what would you recommend how people should become proficient in knowledge wise on how to get up to speed on this. Cause I got to tell you, I mean, it's one of those products and things of that nature, but this is something that, as you said, covers all kinds of different, the industry's big. It touches everybody somehow, indirectly, most of the time. But in that, if I'm a compliance person out there, import export compliance, if I'm legal counsel, obviously for your domestically as well as maybe internationally, what do I need to do to get proficient with this? That's one question. And then second question would be, how or should I get involved, I guess, if I want to have some influence on what legislation is drafted, good, bad, or indifferent? It's like, I'm for it, I'm against it, whatever. But people in my opinion, need to get involved. Usually, in my opinion, is that's being redundant, isn't it? In my opinion, in trade associations of some kind or whatever. Well, is there a trade association that people should be involved in here? I don't know, even from a consumer. So those are the two key questions. What would you guys recommend there?
I could just answer the first part of that. I'd sort of be remiss not to say that it's a really interesting time in cannabis right now, because very recently, about a month ago, the Department of Health and Human Services, which is on top of the FDA, actually recommended, supposedly in a letter that nobody's seen, that cannabis be rescheduled, right? They said, let's move cannabis off Schedule 1 after these 50 some years, and let's put it down in Schedule 3. That was their determination. They said it's not as dangerous as we thought. It might have some medical use, et cetera. It belongs in this less restricted schedule of drugs. Now, let's say that that directive is actually followed in DEA about a year from now, which is a reasonable estimate of the timeline. Let's say they move it into Schedule 3. Does that fix things? No, not necessarily. I mean, it's still scheduled, right? And all of these people trafficking in marijuana are still trafficking in a controlled substances. It's less restricted, but it'd be kind of like you opened a store in a different Schedule 3 controlled substance. You know what else is on Schedule 3? Anabolic steroids, codeine. So let's say I opened a codeine shop on the street and I just started selling codeine to anybody who wanted to walk up and buy it, or steroids to anybody. That, it's the same sort of thing. So there's like a funny dissonance there. It would help the marijuana businesses because it would remove some of the oppressive, like tax code stuff that affects them on Schedule 1, et cetera. But if people want to comment on this and people want to follow along, now's the time. I mean, this is the first time in the history of the Controlled Substances Act where they're finally talking about moving marijuana at President Biden's directive. That HHS look at this. You asked about trade associations and stuff. I'm not sure Adams can answer this in the second when I'm done. If there's an international trade organization that sort of would comment or opine on this, there are national organizations, right? There's the old ones like NORML, National Organization of Marijuana Reform, or Reform of Marijuana Laws. I think I got that acronym right. There's Cannabis Regulators Association, which is kind of all the states teaming up and trying to talk to the federal government about, like, here's what you should do, kind of catch up with us. So there are a bunch of sort of avenues, and there are almost endless. National Cannabis Organization, National Cannabis, NCIA, National Cannabis Industry Association. Kind of see where you're situated and which one makes the most sense for you. But there's going to be an opportunity to comment on the record coming up here, because this rescheduling thing is a big deal, and they're going to open it up for comment, and there's going to be testimony to Congress, written testimony, oral testimony. There's probably going to be litigation from people who want to stop the process and don't want it to be rescheduled. And it's not certain if DEA is even going to follow the recommendation. DEA might say, nope, we're not going to move it to 3. We don't really care what you recommended, scientists, like they've done that before. Or they might say, actually, we're going to just deschedule it. We can't, the Schedule 3 isn't going to help anything. So there are a lot of ways that this could go. And I would say that, the time is now. And Adams, you could follow up, but anything I missed there.
Yeah, no, I think your question is, how do I get involved? I think this whole cannabis industry is so huge that you can get involved on the international level, on the national level, on the state level, on the local level. It could be zoning, it could be trade, it could be from a medical perspective, it could be on sort of an ecotourism type of angle. So there's so many different ways. I don't know if there's like a short list of organizations that you could kind of get up to speed with. But I think if you reach out for your particular area of interest, I'm sure you'll be able to find someone and some literature out there that would help you focus on what you want to do. If it's like a local zoning issue, should I have this store showing up in my on the next block over? Do I want to get involved in that issue? That's maybe one way of doing it. Or do I write my legislator to support or oppose a proposed legislation to legalize banking for marijuana companies? Things like that.
I will say that one of the things that comes to mind is the chambers of commerce. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce may be on a federal or national level, maybe if they don't have some kind of commerce committee that would be specifically looking at this. Anybody that's out there, that may be something you want to suggest, but also your local chambers. I mean, if you look at it, the local Chamber of Commerce organizations are business focused. And with that, this is something that, I mean, you've touched on a few things that if you don't have a small subcommittee that is looking into this, you better establish one, because it's one of those things like Adams, that was a fantastic example of, hey, what about zoning? I hadn't even thought about that. It's like, is that a business you want, in your business area or whatever? They're popping up all over now. Somehow some of that has come into play. And the next thing you know, people are going, well, where did this come from? Well, it's because the cannabis industry, as you said, are light years ahead of government in this scenario, and they're light years ahead of even the average citizen on, what's going on. So they see a business opportunity, they're jumping on it. Well, if you want to participate in that, you want to expand on that and make it easier to do business, or you want to restrict it and say, no, this is not a good thing because of whatever the issues are, you need to get involved. You need to get educated, and then you need to get involved and make your voice heard. So, I mean, that's just a suggestion. Other than you were saying in the cannabis industry, there are associations thereof. I'm talking about from a consumer, from a business owner and entity and things of that nature. You need to get up to speed, and it would be wise, in my opinion, again, that now you get a diverse group. You got to have school board folks maybe, or parents of school children, and as well as business people and whatnot. So folks, this is a topic that, that is controversial. I don't know what's going on with my voice all of a sudden. I guess I'm going through puberty again here. Anyway, all that to say is that as we're going through and looking at all this, this is something that you should get up to speed. And I will say, we are going to have your contact information in our show notes. And if possible, Vince, if you can send Lalo a link to your article or articles or whatever, and Adam, same thing, if you've got anything on that, I would love to have that on there so that people, at least it points them in the direction, gets them a little bit further down the road on this. And that would be phenomenal if you don't mind.
Yeah, we can. Well, I'll compile a few links. We write about this stuff actually almost every day. We have a blog called the Canna Law blog where we just constantly publish articles about cannabis law and policy. But I'll send you a few select ones along the lines of trade and along the ones we mentioned in the show. Thanks for having us too.
Guys, you have been an absolute pleasure. This has been interesting. I'm sure we'll have some more on this. I hope that my questions were not too elementary for you. It's just one of those that I am not up to speed on this, and it has been a great, the wealth of knowledge for both of y'all, man, this has been fantastic. And quite frankly, a part of this is a little concerning. So it's like, man, I need to get up to speed. I hope others will on this topic.
Yeah, sounds good.
Well, thank you so much again. Folks, we're going to turn this back over to you. You have been, again, great in sharing our show. This is going to be one that's just a little different than what we normally cover, and I hope that you're going to like it and all of that. With that, I hope you have a great day. And if you have any interest, check our show notes for the contact for Vince and Adams and on this topic. So have a great day.
Thank you very much for joining us. Simply Trade is brought to you by the generous contributions of Global Training Center. You can follow the show and GTC on LinkedIn or Twitter and other social networks. Make sure you check out the show notes in the description for a full rundown of today's show with all the important links. Also, make sure that you share this with a friend and subscribe on your favorite streaming platform. We really like hearing from you. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to rate and review wherever you listen to this podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the show or would like to sponsor Simply Trade or suggest any topic you would like for us to discuss, please contact us via email at simplytrade@globaltrainingcenter.com, or you can DM us on Twitter at simplytradepod. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. Happy trading. Simply Trade is not a law firm or an advisor. The topics and discussions conducted by Simply Trade hosts and guests should not be considered and is not intended to substitute legal advice. You should seek appropriate counsel for your own situations. These conversations and information are directed towards listeners in the United States for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only and should not be substituted for legal advice. No listener or viewer of this podcast should act or refrain from acting on the basis of information on this podcast without first seeking legal advice from counsel. Information on this podcast may not be up to date depending on the time of publishing and the time of viewership. The content of this posting is provided as is. No representations are made that the content is error-free. The views expressed in or through this podcast are those of the individual speakers, not those of their respective employers or Global Training Center as a whole. All liability with respect to actions taken or not taken based on the contents of this podcast are hereby expressly disclaimed.